Martha Reynolds stood at the airport counter, her weathered hands gripping the military escort orders. At 70, this retired Army combat nurse had one final mission: bringing her fallen son, Captain Marcus Reynolds, home from Afghanistan. Nothing would stop a mother's promise. Martha's military career began in 1968 as one of the few black women serving as combat nurses in Vietnam. Her nimble fingers had stitched wounds under gunfire. Her steady voice had calmed dying boys far from home. The Bronze Star and Combat Medical Badge on her preserved dress uniform told only part of her story. Captain Marcus Reynolds had followed his mother's footsteps into service, though he'd chosen Army Special Forces. Different path, same heart, Martha would say proudly. Now, at 42, Marcus had fallen during his fourth deployment, securing evacuations for Afghan allies. 3 generations of the Reynolds family had worn the uniform. Martha's father served in Korea, she in Vietnam, and her son in Afghanistan. Service wasn't just their duty, it was their legacy. The airport bustled around her, travelers rushing past, oblivious to the weight she carried. Martha stood straight despite her years, despite her grief. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her uniform pressed and perfect. The folded flag tucked under her arm wasn't just any flag. It would cover the casket of her only child. She would complete this final mission with the same dignity with which she'd served her country 50 years ago. Martha slid her military ID and the escort papers across the counter, her fingers lingering momentarily on Marcus's photo in the corner. "I'm escorting my son home," she explained, voice steady despite the words that still felt impossible to say. The airline representative glanced at the papers, then at Martha, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You were in the military?" The question carried subtle disbelief. "Vietnam, Army Nurse Corps, 1968 to 1975, Martha replied simply. The woman tapped at her keyboard, frowning. "These escort orders, they're usually for active military personnel. Military family members with prior service can escort fallen soldiers. It's in DoD Directive 1300.22. Martha recited from memory. She'd researched everything meticulously. No detail overlooked. Marcus deserved perfection. The representative called over a supervisor, a young man with an impatient expression who barely glanced at Martha's documents before shaking his head. "Ma'am, these don't appear to be standard papers. We can't verify their authenticity." Martha's heart hammered against her ribs. "My son is on this plane. Captain Marcus Reynolds. I'm bringing him home." The supervisor's expression hardened. Anyone could wear an old uniform and claim military privileges. "We need proper verification." Martha stood taller, her military bearing evident despite her years. "Call the Military Mortuary Affairs Office. Their number is on those papers." "I'm sorry, but we have procedures. You'll need to step aside for other passengers." Martha didn't move. "My son is on that plane. I will not step aside." The line behind Martha grew, passengers shifting impatiently until they began to understand what was happening. A young woman in army fatigue stepped out of line, approaching the counter. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the distinct authority of an officer. "Is there a problem here?" "It's a verification issue," the supervisor replied, suddenly less confident. The female soldier observed Martha's uniform, noting the combat medical badge and service ribbons. "Ma'am, did you serve?" she asked respectfully. "Vietnam, Army Nurse Corps, 8th Field Hospital, Nha Trang." The soldier turned to the airline staff, her posture straightening. "That's a legitimate combat medical badge and Bronze Star. Those aren't handed out as souvenirs." More passengers began paying attention. A middle-aged man removed his hat when he noticed a folded flag under Martha's arm. A woman gasped quietly, whispering to her husband. The atmosphere shifted from irritation to concern. "My son is Captain Marcus Reynolds," Martha explained, her voice unwavering. "Afghanistan. He's coming home today, and I promise to be with him every step of the way." The female soldier's jaw tightened. "And you're preventing her from fulfilling that promise?" she asked the airline staff, loud enough for others to hear. "This isn't right," someone muttered. Phones emerged from pockets. A college student started recording, live streaming. I'm at the airport where they're refusing to let a black veteran mother escort her fallen son's remains home, he narrated quietly. The supervisor noticed the recording and grew flustered. Ma'am, perhaps we can discuss this privately. There's nothing to discuss, Martha replied. My son is on that plane. These are legitimate military escort orders. A businessman in line stepped forward. My brother served 2 tours in Iraq. Those are legitimate escort documents. I've seen them before. Another passenger, already seated near the gate, posted a photo with the caption, Airline denying 70-year-old black military mother escorting her fallen son home. Disgusting. Hashtag let her bring her son home. The hashtag caught fire immediately. A veterans group with millions of followers shared it. A military family support organization posted, watching the situation closely. Military families deserve better. This mother deserves to bring her hero home. The supervisor disappeared to make calls while the original agent avoided eye contact. Passengers abandoned their places in line, forming a protective semicircle around Martha. The female soldier remained beside her, occasionally checking her phone as the social media storm grew. Ma'am, it's trending nationwide, she whispered to Martha. Military support networks are mobilizing. Martha stood unmoved, her eyes fixed on the door to the tarmac where her son waited. She hadn't fought for recognition. All she wanted was to fulfill her promise. They don't understand, she said quietly. When he was deployed, I promised him if anything happened, I would bring him home myself. A mother keeps her promises. The words, captured on video, spread across platforms. Hashtag a mother keeps her promises began trending alongside hashtag let her bring her son home. A retired Air Force colonel in civilian clothes approached, introducing himself to Martha. Mrs. Reynolds? I served with your son in Kandahar, 2018. He saved my life. Martha nodded, recognizing the name Marcus had mentioned in his letters. The gate area was now packed with curious onlookers and supportive passengers. An elderly Vietnam veteran wearing a faded service cap saluted Martha, his eyes moist. Others followed suit, not just veterans, but civilians who recognized the sacrifice before them. The airline's regional manager arrived, sweating despite the air conditioning. He'd been bombarded with calls from corporate headquarters. The story had reached major news networks. Veterans organizations were issuing statements. Military family advocacy groups were calling for boycotts. Mrs. Reynolds, he began, his voice artificially soothing. There seems to have been a misunderstanding. We honor your service and your son's sacrifice. There's no misunderstanding, the female soldier interrupted. Your staff questioned the legitimacy of a Bronze Star recipient's military ID and denied a mother her right to escort her fallen son. A congressman's office had called the airline's executive team. Military mortuary affairs had confirmed Martha's escort status. The airline's social media accounts were flooded with thousands of angry comments. The regional manager attempted damage control. We can board you immediately, Mrs. Reynolds. First class, of course. Martha finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. This isn't about where I sit. This is about respect, not just for me, but for every parent who's received that knock on the door. The crowd murmured in agreement. Someone began a slow clap that spread across the terminal. A young mother with a baby stepped forward, tears in her eyes. My husband is deployed right now. What your son did for our country, what you did, thank you. Martha's composure nearly broke then, not from the airline's treatment, but from this stranger's genuine gratitude. She reached out and squeezed the young mother's hand, the simple gesture captured in photos that would soon be shared millions of times. The terminal doors opened as a group of uniformed military personnel entered, an honor guard sent from the nearby base, led by a female lieutenant colonel. Mrs. Reynolds, the officer said, saluting crisply, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Diane Jackson. The Secretary of the Army has been briefed on this situation. Martha returned the salute, military muscle memory overriding her 70 years. We're here to ensure Captain Reynolds and his mother receive appropriate honors and escort, Lieutenant Colonel Jackson announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. She turned to the airline representative. The military is assuming responsibility for this escort mission. Representatives from 3 different veterans organizations had arrived, forming an impromptu honor corridor. The president of the Gold Star Mothers Association, a support group for mothers who lost children in military service, embraced Martha. "You're not alone," she whispered. Martha reached inside her uniform jacket and withdrew her son's photograph. Marcus in his dress uniform, strong and proud. For a moment, her armor cracked, her hand trembling as she traced his face. "He looks just like you," the Gold Star mother said gently. "He has his father's smile," Martha replied, her voice catching. "But he got my stubbornness." The crowd laughed softly, respectfully. This moment of vulnerability, this glimpse of the mother behind the soldier, resonated deeply with witnesses. A military chaplain stepped forward, offering a brief prayer for Captain Reynolds. Passengers bowed their heads, regardless of faith. The airline staff stood uncomfortably at the periphery, watching as their gate area transformed into a space of solemn respect. "Mrs. Reynolds," Lieutenant Colonel Jackson said, "a military aircraft is standing by to transport you and Captain Reynolds home with full honors. The Secretary of the Army extends his personal condolences." The regional manager tried once more. "Mrs. Reynolds, we sincerely apologize. We can still accommodate." "No," Martha interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "My son deserves better than to be treated as an afterthought. We both do." She turned to face the gathered crowd, her posture military straight despite her years. "I want to thank you all, not just for today, but for remembering what service means." The female soldier who had first intervened stepped forward. "Permission to escort you to the military transport, ma'am?" Martha nodded, emotion finally showing in her eyes. "Permission granted, Lieutenant." The honor guard formed ranks. The Gold Star mothers formed a protective circle around Martha. Veterans and civilians created a path through the terminal. As Martha walked toward the exit, passengers stood in respect. Some saluted. Others placed hands over hearts. Many recorded the moment, sharing it with captions about dignity, respect, and a mother's love. A spontaneous rendition of "God Bless America" began somewhere in the crowd, soft at first, then growing as more voices joined. When Martha passed the original airline counter, she paused. The staff who had denied her looked away, unable to meet her eyes. Without malice, without triumph, she simply nodded at them. The gesture, dignified forgiveness from a woman they had wronged, was perhaps the most powerful statement of all. Outside, the military transport waited. The honor guard stood at attention as Martha approached her son's flag-draped casket on the tarmac. She placed her hand on the flag, allowing herself one moment of private grief before straightening her shoulders once more. "I'm here, Marcus," she whispered. "Mother's bringing you home." The image, elderly black woman in Vietnam-era uniform beside her son's casket, became the defining photograph of the incident. The airline's handling of Martha Reynolds became a national scandal. Their stock dropped 12% in 24 hours. The hashtag "let her bring her son home" and hashtag "a mother keeps her promises" remained trending for days. Veterans organizations announced boycotts. Military family advocacy groups filed formal complaints with the Department of Transportation. 3 major military-focused publications ran cover stories featuring Martha's photograph beside her son's casket. The airline CEO issued a public apology, announcing mandatory sensitivity training for all staff regarding military families and veterans. The supervisor and gate agent were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. 5 senators and 11 representatives from both political parties issued statements condemning the airline's actions and calling for industry-wide guidelines on treatment of military families. A congressional hearing was scheduled to address systemic issues facing military families during bereavement. The Military Officers Association of America established the Martha Reynolds Dignity Fund to assist military families facing similar situations. The Association of Black Military Women named Martha their Person of the Year. Martha herself remained largely quiet during the media storm, focusing instead on her son's funeral arrangements at Arlington National Cemetery. When reporters sought statements, she redirected attention to ongoing challenges facing military families, particularly those from minority backgrounds. "This isn't about me," she told the one reporter she agreed to speak with. "It's about respect for service and sacrifice, not just my sons, but everyone who puts on a uniform." The airline attempted to make amends by donating to veterans organizations and establishing a military family assistance program. Their internal investigation revealed troubling patterns of implicit bias in customer service interactions. The supervisor who had denied Martha later admitted that he found it unusual to see an elderly black woman in military uniform claiming escort privileges. "I made assumptions I shouldn't have," he acknowledged in sensitivity training videos later implemented industry-wide. A documentary filmmaker began following Martha, capturing stories of her Vietnam service and her son's military career. 2 Generations of Service became one of the most watched documentaries the following year, highlighting challenges faced by black military families across decades. Airline denied black military mother escorting her fallen son home. Nation shocked. This powerful story follows 70-year-old Martha Reynolds, a Vietnam veteran combat nurse who faced discrimination when attempting to escort her fallen soldier son home. What happened next at that airport changed airline policies nationwide and sparked a national conversation about respect for military families. Martha's dignified stand against injustice shows how one mother's determination can inspire a movement. Watch as passengers, veterans, and eventually the military itself rally behind this Bronze Star recipient fighting for her right to complete one final mission for her son. A powerful reminder of the sacrifices military families make and the respect they deserve. This story will move you to tears while reminding us all what true courage looks like. Hashtag military family, hashtag respect, hashtag mother-son bond, hashtag veteran stories, hashtag stand for justice. This is a dramatized story for entertainment purposes, inspired by various real events. Names and specific details have been changed. This video honors all military families who have made the ultimate sacrifice